This is an oral history interview with Robert B. Jarboe, 1248 Whittingham, East Lansing, Michigan, 48823, phone 517-351-7710. 3 tapes. Date December 5th, 1989, with Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center at the GM Training Center, EDC North, Lansing, Michigan. Okay, we're on camera, action. Bob, if you'll tell me who you are and your address and phone number, we'll just get right going.
Okay, I'm Robert B. Jarboe, better known as Bob perhaps through all my 39 and a half years with Oldsmobile. I was a veteran of World War II and took my college degree at the University of California in Berkeley, California. And upon graduation, started looking for a position.
Where do you live near now, Bob, if you would, and your phone number?
Okay, presently I'm residing at 1248 Whittingham Drive, East Lansing, Michigan, 48823 zip code, area code 517-351-7710. After looking around metropolitan San Francisco area for a job, the University of California had an inquiry from the Oldsmobile Division Zone Office in Oakland for a couple of applicants for a job known as Assistant Office Manager Car Distributor. I had the privilege of being one of the two recommended people. From that college, a couple came from Stanford and a couple came from the University of San Francisco. I thought perhaps I would be sent back to Michigan because I had no real concept that the automobile industry had anything like zone offices. And when I found out that the job was available and served Northern California and Western Nevada, and that I could get $210 a month, and believe me, in the 30 days prior to that time, the job availability to a college graduate was $170 to $190 to $200 with 5-year training program and things like that. $210 a month plus cost of living, which is about $8 more a month, seemed like a fantastic opportunity.
What year was that?
This is March 1st, 1950, that I started out as the office manager car distributor.
What did you do as office manager car distributor, Bob?
One of the really interesting jobs, part of the job, including providing customers who would take delivery of their new car back in Lansing, Michigan. The freight rates across the United States were not equalized in those years, and people could save enough money if they took delivery of their car in the Midwest at the factory that might pay for their transportation there or a vacation there. So if they had some business associates or some family members in the Midwest, they would fly or drive in another car into this area, and we would make arrangements, so many people a day and so many types of cars per day. We had an actual schedule that we had to fulfill. And sometimes we could work with the Lansing car distribution department. A fellow named Nolan Walker at that time was in charge of that activity, and if we needed an extra vehicle over our allotment, maybe we could trade it off with the Los Angeles zone or the Denver zone or the Portland zone, and provide people with the opportunity to come and get their car at a less cost. They didn't have to pay for the freight. And the delivery would be made out of the Porter Garage in Lansing, Michigan. And
where was that located?
That was located in downtown Lansing, off of the grounds of the Oldsmobile division, but it was a commercial firm, and it was open 7 days a week and after hours at night, so that person arriving on an odd hour or on a weekend didn't have to wait over till the following day or the following Monday to get their car.
Was that primarily your job responsibility?
That was my main job. I had to assist the car distributor in doing what they call pulling the preference. I was providing the production plants in Lansing and in Southgate, California, with so many orders per week so that the production 3 weeks, 4 weeks hence could continue.
And where did these orders come from?
They came from dealers that had sold these cars or needed them for stock throughout Northern California and Western Nevada. This was the area served by the zone, about 120 Oldsmobile dealers.
Was that 120 in just the
The
Oakland
Oakland zone. Yeah.
Now, the Oakland zone was under what region?
It was under the Pacific region. At that present moment in time, Mr. George Natzel was the regional manager. He had 4 zone offices reporting to him, as I quickly mentioned earlier: the Portland zone, the Los Angeles zone, the Oakland zone, and the Denver zone. Once a year, the zone manager and the regional manager would go to Lansing to figure out the national production for the ensuing year. So the Los Angeles zone manager would get a train and then go by train to San Francisco. The Portland zone manager would come down by train. The zone manager in Oakland and the regional manager in Oakland would then board the train, and they'd start east, picking up the zone manager in Denver. And on the train en route to Lansing, Michigan, they would figure out their national need for vehicles and their projections of sales for the ensuing year. By the time they arrived in Lansing, they'd be able to join in with the other regional managers and see how many cars they needed to have built or wanted to make up their sales estimate for the ensuing year.
Was there a dealer council in effect at that time?
I don't really recall that there was one. Now, it might very well have been of some nature. Helen, as an assistant office manager, car distributor, I wasn't always in deep knowledge of all the upper management workings, and I don't recall of one. I don't remember serving in any capacity that would.
How many people were in the Oakland zone at that time when you were hired in?
No. Well, we had a combined regional zone office, so there's a regional manager and his secretary, zone manager, assistant zone manager, a service manager, a car distributor, assistant car distributor, 5 secretary stenographers, 4 district manager sales, and 4 district manager service. I don't know what that adds up to. 8, 12, maybe 20 people, something like that.
Where was the Oakland zone office located in?
I don't remember the street address, but it was right down and very close to what we call downtown Oakland, which has changed over the decades, and fairly near to the wharf where Jack London's restaurant is located today. And I can't think of the address.
Well, Bob, how long were you in that position?
I held that position, a year and a half, year and 7, 8 months. And then I had the good fortune to be named district manager in Fresno, California. And
what does the district manager do?
District manager has the responsibility to call on about 35 Oldsmobile dealers in a segment of the zone to see that we have proper dealer representation. If there's a town and we don't have a dealer at present, it passed on, or the town just all of a sudden grew large enough to warrant our consideration of putting a new dealer point into that town, I have to find and interview dealer applicants, investigate whether or not they had enough finances to carry on business until they could get their sales up to a rate to start making a profit. I'd have to help analyze their financial statements to see if there are some areas that they may be weak in compared to other dealers in the same region. We wouldn't mention the other dealers' names, but we'd have a composite average of the amount of money you'd make off the per used car or per repair order in the service department or per new car sale, the average number of accessories sold per new car, for example. We had one dealer particularly who was twice the national average. He sold more accessories per car than anybody else. We'd always have to kind of take his figures out of the average, or they would put everybody else below average, so to speak. But if somebody was not selling to the average level, we found an area for more profit for that dealership and would try to point it out to them. There was a lot of public relations work. There was a lot of promotional work. We would have to establish training for new salesmen was done on a one-to-one basis or a morning sales meeting. I got some new information on next year's products or a change of products, then I would hold meetings and try to alert the retail sales force of impending changes and what those benefits were. One thing, for example, came out when I was a district manager was a power brake. Now, the first time someone drove a car with a power brake, they would step on the brake and with the same force they put on the old manual brake, and their head would go forward, maybe sometimes hit the windshield. It was a delicate change in habit. And we were trying to teach them that it would be the same as trying to step on a light bulb and not break the light bulb, that the amount of pressure to apply to the brake was just very, very small compared to the normal habits. That took a lot of doing, so the salesman would then understand how to show the ultimate customers how to use this new accessory.
Very interesting. Did you deal with dealer signs, or was that service manager's responsibility?
No, that was a kind of a combination, because if a new dealership was being built or a new facility was being transferred from an older facility, the signing or the identification of our car line to the consuming public, perhaps on a passing highway or high enough above other signs so they wouldn't be blocked by other commercial signs, was a necessary part of the analysis. And then we'd have to do that in conjunction with the district service manager, who would then want to have a service sign. People would know what side of the building to enter for repairs and things of that nature. And that was a part of the regular activities that went on.
Do you recall any incident where a dealer was reluctant to accept one of the factory programs?
Oh, yes, I think that's a fairly true feeling in many of our dealers. I can recall, for example, dealers who did not want to purchase new product year announcement signs, which would be large paper that would be pasted on windows of dealerships saying the 1951s are here, come in on September 27th or whatever the date might be. And they may say, now you're going to block all of our cars inside. I don't want anything on my windows. I paid X number of dollars for that gorgeous showroom window, and therefore I don't need that. So your job was to find out really what you might have in the total available announcement material that would best serve that dealer, his dealership deals. Now, perhaps those similar kind of signs could appear inside the service department, or could appear, smaller versions, could appear in the individual salesman's closing offices, or what have you. There was a lot of give and take because of individual needs, individual costs of our items, but there was always various options that would at least give some identification of the things, yes.
Bob, what about the advertising fund? Did a dealer make a contribution to that? How was that handled?
In 1950, 51, early 50s, nothing of that nature was available in our industry. In the late 40s and prior to World War II, there had been a thing known as the Cooperative Advertising Fund, where dealers were charged so much per car, and then people in the home office in Lansing would combine those funds until they had enough to put out advertising in the various areas. There was no dealer input as to what the media should be or what time of the year would be best. And it was a system that, while had a good reason for being in existence, didn't work out so well in the field, and it had been done away with after a lot of discussion. So it was kind of a time when everybody was doing their own thing, but it was also a time when car production was not very high. We were just building up things after World War II. In many instances, demand succeeded supply, and a lot of advertising, as you may know it, in the 70s or 80s was not the normal thing.
Wasn't necessary, really.
Well, it was necessary at a much lower level.
I see. Okay.
We hadn't experienced any vehicles being produced by the Japanese automobile manufacturers or the European automobile manufacturers that would cause a great amount of.
Okay. How long were you a district manager?
I was a district manager for another year and a half
In Oakland?
in the Fresno district of the Oakland zone. And then an unusual circumstance happened in my career. I had what might be called a junior status as district managers. Warrant, there were 4 districts and I was number 4. In those days, the best or the most talented district manager was hopefully employed in the major district number 1, which was covering the metropolitan area. With San Francisco, dealers who had to sell more cars had bigger investments and therefore hopefully had a district manager who had more business experience and things of that nature. However, at a zone meeting one day, assistant general sales manager for the western part of the United States happened to be on hand.
Who was he?
And give that thing a click off for a minute.
Okay. We're all set.
The name was James Stroud, and among the things he was doing was looking for an employee to become the office manager car distributor in the Dallas zone, another region. And in those days, in the early 50s, it wasn't the general practice to move an employee across regional lines. We traveled by train, as I mentioned earlier. No one was flying any place by airplane except people, for example, in Mr. Stroud's position who had to cover gigantic areas of the United States. And the moving costs were not planned in budgets. But I had the opportunity to have won a monthly contest at that point in time, and in making my presentation of how it was done, Mr. Stroud asked a question of Harvey Waite, the zone manager, did this young man have any car distribution experience? And Mr. Waite said yes. I had been the assistant office manager car distributor for a year and a half in that zone. And ultimately, I was promoted to Dallas as the office manager car distributor with approximately 3 years experience on the payroll, and never having had at that point in my career the chance to call on or be a district manager for metropolitan dealers. So I did move across the region and established a kind of a new experience, and something that people at the Oldsmobile personnel staff began to wonder if maybe in looking for people, they might look at neighboring regions, not within the same region, as far as looking for people who could do new jobs.
Who was zone manager in Dallas?
Zone manager in Dallas at the time was a gentleman named Harry Gepp. And the regional manager was a gentleman named Mr. Carl Deist. And later, Mr. Deist was replaced by Vic Sutherland as regional manager, and then ultimately by George Clemison before I left that area.
How long were you in Dallas?
I was in Dallas a little over 4 years.
All in district number 1?
Well, no, you see, I went in as the office manager car distributor.
I see.
But during that period of time, I guess my name was considered for a couple other jobs, one in Lansing, and one as a zone business management manager. And in both cases, the personnel people, after analysis of all the men and women considered for that job, said that I had not had the opportunity to call on metropolitan dealers, so perhaps they would pick somebody else. So Mr. Gepp one day said to me, Bob, he says, you've been looked over and found wanting in one part of your business experience. So I'm recommending that you become the district manager number 1 in Dallas. And this was an unusual twist because an office manager car distributor was a department head and ranked higher than the district manager. Although that has changed somewhat in years afterwards. And in Chevrolet, district manager number 1 had often come from even an assistant zone manager's job. He was really a highly qualified, well-experienced automobile business individual. But it appeared to be, if my career was to move on, a helpful thing, and he said he recommended it, and I accepted his interest in my career. He made me the district manager in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I was in that job for about 8 months when my next opportunity came along, and I was appointed assistant zone manager in Houston zone for about 3 or 4 days. The interesting thing there was it was going to be a new zone. But at the same time, Oldsmobile was thinking of opening half a dozen new zone offices. General Motors was being viewed by the United States Senate, particularly Senator Kefauver, as being a potential monopoly. And it was thought to be very wise from a business standpoint not to announce the opening of 6 new offices during this period of time. So after only a couple of days of making ready to open that office, we went back to our former jobs. And in actuality, I never went to the Houston zone, which was opened about 6 or 7 months later. I went into other line of work, which actually led me to my first trip to Lansing, Michigan.
Bob, while you were in Dallas, now that was a different region, you said.
Yeah.
What was the name of that region?
Well, that was the Southwest region.
What zones comprised that?
In those days, the Dallas zone, and then later on, as I mentioned, toward 1956 or 7, there was a consideration to split the Dallas zone in half and open up a Houston zone. Oklahoma City was the zone office. Kansas City was a zone office. And St. Louis. So there were 4 zones, not counting the possibility of adding Houston.
You'd mentioned a moment ago about a business management manager, but you didn't name that position when you were talking about the Oakland zone.
Okay, well, at that particular moment in time, that job did not exist in 1950, 51, 2, and 3. But shortly after I was in Dallas, late 1954, something in that time frame, it was considered to put a specialist into every office, someone who could train all the other district managers and Oldsmobile employees on proper and more experienced analysis of financial statements so they could be a better help to dealers. And that was a new department head job that was opened up, and I was one of many being considered for it, but it passed over. And in actuality, never had that job assignment in my career. We all had to do basic business management examinations by correspondence for Oldsmobile, but never did I work exclusively on that subject alone.
How long were you in Dallas then?
I think we mentioned that a little bit earlier, but it was a little over 4 years. I did a short stint of basically about 18 months. I was sent to Chicago to the Sales Analysis Institute of Illinois. And there I was trained as a sales trainer and as a platform procedural techniques, how to draw questions from crowds, how to hopefully quiet down a boisterous individual, how to summarize points and bring a meeting to a conclusion, things of that nature, as well as specifically how to indoctrinate our field people in a specific technique of selling, which is known and taught by this company. And another gentleman named Webb Hoffman, with Oldsmobile employee, and myself were sent through the instructor's course, as I said, covered over a period of time, about 18 weeks. And then, while the company trained the first 4 classes, when we graduated as instructors, I taught the 5th class and the 6th class before I moved on to another job assignment. And that was the time frame when I spent a 8-month period of time in Lansing, Michigan before I left for another field assignment.
So about what year was that when you came into the home office?
Okay. That was 1956, along about summertime. I'd been in Chicago, let's say the 4 months before that, 4+ months before that. But my family moved to Lansing. My 3rd child was born in Lansing. And then we left the following April to go to the Buffalo zone. Another set of circumstances existed. But during the last few months of that short assignment in Lansing, the Sales Analysis Institute program was put on hold for a while when they did finally open up those 5 or 6 new zone offices, and then Webb, Hoffman, and myself became instructors to new employees to go out and man those zone offices. Many of those people were newly hired, transferred from other General Motors divisions, many out of Lansing's home office, out of the accounting departments, out of the parts department, out of the sales promotion department. And we had the opportunity to interview them, and then those who were selected for transfer to field assignments went through a training program, which I was the instructor in, and helped them prepare to work in zone office from the experience I'd had and from the training I'd had in the Chicago Sales Analysis Institute.
Well, you did that during your 8 months in
Yeah,
Lansing?
yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, you worked under sales then, general sales?
I did work under general
Who did
sales
you
then.
report to?
I reported, first of all, to Mr. Lee Witter, who had previously been a zone manager in Kansas City when I was in the Dallas zone, and who was, at that moment in time, the director of personnel for Oldsmobile. And then ultimately, in the last final weeks, while I was doing the training for the new field personnel, I reported to Mr. Morgie Seaton, who was the general merchandising manager. And
What kind of a man to work for was Mr. Seaton?
Mr. Seaton, who is still alive today, and perhaps may be one of your interviewees, I don't know that, had an extremely strong forte in accuracy and proper detail. Hopefully, and I can't remember a case that any general letter was sent to the field or to dealers or that wasn't precise, specific, and accurate. He had an excellent training in the English language. He knew the policies of both the corporation and the Oldsmobile division specifically. He knew the dealer body. He knew the management styles. And if you'd overlooked something or had made a sentence or two in your letter of instructions that were open to more than one interpretation, he could very likely put his finger right on it. So it was, sometimes you grumbled about it, but always you said, well, thank God Morgie's here because it saves you from having to do the job a second time or sit on your telephone and explain to 40 people what you really meant to say. And you didn't have time to do that job twice or 3 times or 40 times. He knew his product very well, and he just had a very crisp, accurate, specific, get the job done on time and right attitude, which was a good management technique.
Now, you mentioned Lee Witter. What type of person was he to work with?
Lee Witter was probably one of the most intelligent men I think I ever been around at Oldsmobile. I don't know if I can do justice to his capabilities. Lee was bright, sharp, things came quickly to mind. He could outline things in multiple levels of detail. Again, many people said, my God, there's a letter from Witter. It's going to take 6 Philadelphia lawyers to understand it. Well, it meant you'd have to read it slowly and absorb it. Then you know exactly what to do. And he spent many, many hours, and perhaps I think, in my own estimation, served Oldsmobile the best when he was the director of organization and analysis, which had a fantastic amount of legal aspects to that task with all of our 3,300 Oldsmobile dealers in those days and their franchises and elements of selling vehicles and the contracts we had to have with independent businessmen who became our franchise dealers.
Then didn't we sell or have a dealer sign an agreement every year?
In those days, it was contract time once a year. That's right. And so once a year, Lee Witter's department had to provide the documentation for every zone office, every district manager, cover all 3,300 plus dealers, whatever our number was at each individual year. And that in itself, was a definition of the multiple levels of detail that he had to provide so that kind of a job could be carried out by people who knew very little about that task, but following a set of good instructions could go about their business and if some dealer could not make it to the contract meeting or was injured perhaps or in hospital or, you'd have to go. I
Go?
remember occasionally I had to go to a hospital and explain all of the contractual changes for the new year to a dealer, and didn't have the backing of any senior members of the company. But I did have Mr. Witter's instruction letter, and it stood me in good stead. In another instance, I spoke to a dealer who was in his 80s, not active on a day-to-day basis in his dealership. Two sons-in-law ran the dealership, one in sales and one in service. And we were concerned that at this advanced age, he might pass on and not leave the dealership with the knowledge of who he wanted to administer or to run or take his place. When he outlined this to me, I said to him, I said, well, why don't you tell us which one of your sons-in-law you want as a dealer, and we'll follow your instructions. We want you to tell us this, or maybe somebody from outside of your family, or maybe somebody from General Motors or another dealership will come in and buy the place out. It won't be what you want. He was concerned because a friend of his, another dealer, had two sons-in-law in the business, and the moment they got a good share of the business, they divorced the two daughters, and his family lost out. My recommendation to him was to put the property in the daughters' hands, and they became the landlords, to name the two sons-in-law as managers and operators of the franchise, because they knew the business. That way protect his fatherly feelings for his two daughters. And he said, by God, that's the only sound idea I've heard in a long time. And in about 20 minutes time, we got accomplished what we'd been trying to get accomplished in 4 or 5 years, because we didn't know really his objection to not naming a successor to himself. Today, his grandson runs that dealership in Muskegon, Michigan.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, now you're in, you're ready to leave Lansing for another move. You served your training
Okay,
period.
you don't mean today, you mean 1957 now. Oh, yeah. Well, this is very, very interesting. There was an accident by the assistant zone manager in the Buffalo zone. The gentleman's name I can't recall. But it was on the New York freeway, and his vehicle wound up running into a overpass abutment, and he broke his foot such a way that his doctor said he couldn't ever drive extended distances any longer. And so, again, on a very short notice type of thing, 8 months on this job instead of a couple of years, which was normal before you were considered for transfer, I wound up as assistant zone manager in the Buffalo zone, which is part of the central region. And Mr. Harry Banks was the regional manager, and the Detroit zone was the major zone, the Buffalo zone, the Cincinnati zone, the Cleveland zone, and the Pittsburgh zone. There were 5 of them. Cleveland was one of the new zones opened up in that period of time. And assistant zone manager's responsibilities were to be kind of a sales manager to the district managers, see that they got their jobs done, assign them the dealers who needed to be trained or checked on or administered, and to assist the zone manager in being sure we had adequate dealers who were capitalized and had facilities where they could carry on their business and be competitive in their areas.
How many dealers do we have in Central Region in 57?
No. And I don't know that figure, but I'm going to hazard a guess approaching 500. Well, see, there were 6 regions, and we were over 3,000. And it might have been closer to 600 in that region, because it's a very compact part of the United States. You get out west in the Montanas and Wyomings and things like that, and there's fewer towns compact as there would be in the Midwest. So I don't know the exact number.
No, you don't recall the name of the zone manager.
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh.
Thank goodness.
Okay.
Zone manager of Buffalo at the time was Mr. Burt Green.
Oh, yes.
And interestingly enough, I was there almost like 2 years to the day. And when I was transferred to my next assignment, Mr. Green was transferred back to Lansing to become the office manager, budget manager for the Oldsmobile Division sales staff. So,
So you were in the Central Region as the assistant zone manager of Buffalo for almost 2 years.
2 years, and then I went to Detroit as assistant zone manager for the Detroit zone, and also a similar period of time.
Let me see,
2
you said
years.
Mr. Banks was the regional manager.
Both that during that 4-year period of time. But Mr. Banks brought to my experience a different type of management. He was a master at what I might call telephone follow-up. He gave you an assignment to do, and you got a letter from him every Monday morning saying, what do you want you to do that week? Broad objectives that you were supposed to channel into your own action plan to try to accomplish certain things. But by Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning, you'd get a phone call saying, well, what is your plan? How have you started it? So, you better go do something, because you knew he's going to call you if you decided not to do anything or put his letter aside. You had to explain why, and that's nothing that a lot of people like to do, is have the boss say, why aren't you doing anything? He also had a in-depth supply of selling techniques. He always had a card or a form or 6 steps for something or 5 ways to do a certain thing. And while there was a large number of them, if you would just take any one of them and work on it, it was a simple sales meeting. It was a simple message to new district managers. It was an outline, step-by-step formula of how to call 12 people a day, write 10 postcards, visit with 3 people in the automobile industry at garages or service stations or something like that to see if you can get leads, call old customers. So are you satisfied with your car? Anybody mentioned they'd like to have a new car? So you would have a step-by-step technique of how to sell more cars. That was your need. So each regional manager, each zone manager along the line brought some, new methods to my attention for use.
Now, you mentioned after 2 years in Detroit, you were moved on to...
Detroit. Oh, 2 years in Detroit?
Yes.
Okay, well, in Detroit, I worked for Mr. Fritz Forster, zone manager, then for Mr. Jim Knowles in the last year. And then I came to Lansing.
You were still assistant zone manager?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
To Lansing, then what would that be, 1959?
1961. I was in Detroit 59 to 61, Buffalo 57 to 59.
Then, what was your position?
Well, I was manager of group selling, which was a strange title in my head. It wasn't the normal thing like service manager or business manager or car distributor or district manager. Here was a title where I said, what does that mean? In fact, it was a title I carried for a lot of years and ultimately came to mean something, but in those early years in 1961 or so, the real meaning of the job title was that I had to provide a broad overview to a crowd of people, to a group of people about our product. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, one easy way was to provide parade cars for a Shrine parade or a Miss America parade or a Walt Disney parade where 100 or 200 or 150 Oldsmobiles would go down the city streets of Chicago or Detroit or Miami or someplace and be viewed by 30,000, 80,000, 150,000 people. Now, you weren't talking to each individual, but as a group, you were trying to have them view your product in a favorable light. Now, you could also take into consideration the fantastic pride of the hometown and home state people of who is now Senator, come on now, there we go again, give me a stop. Okay, that's where I have to, my bells all come rolling. When John Glenn, presently Senator John Glenn from the state of Ohio, returned as an astronaut from a nationwide, actually worldwide experience, there was a parade in his hometown. And the crowd was just jam-packed, and Life magazine had a 2-page spread that had people stretching out for miles trying to take pictures of, touch, get the autograph of, throw confetti on, cheer, applaud John Glenn for his magic moment in history. And what kind of car was he driving? An Oldsmobile convertible. And it's visible in this picture. And while people didn't come out to see the Oldsmobile, they saw John Glenn in an Oldsmobile, and therefore our car had a group experience that we couldn't pay for from an advertising standpoint because Life magazine just distributed it to through a massive audience, things of that nature. We had automobile shows was a part of that type of a task, and while we went to 40, 45 major automobile shows, and the crowds were anywhere from 20,000 in a small city to approaching 1 million people in Chicago. You had to have all your new cars there, your new colors there, your new transmissions, your new engines. You had to have narrators telling people about it. And while there were retail salesmen working the floor, there was no way they could talk to every individual. And you'd have to find out some way to hold people into your area so they wouldn't wander off looking for competitive cars.
Now, would they be shows like Chicago Auto Show?
That's right. Detroit Automobile Show, Los Angeles Automobile Show, Miami Automobile Show. And so the groups of people, how did you attract their attention? So group selling activities manager was what my title was and what my responsibility was. But there were displays and exhibits and parades and celebrities and
dealer marketing cars.
And that came on a little bit later on as a thing to make you stay in the area. Yeah. And in 61, 2, and 3, that didn't, but around 60, late 66 and 67, the dealer marketing concept started developing. And
now let's
then
get back to these celebrities. What kind of celebrities? Miss America, you mentioned.
Well, Oldsmobile was affiliated as a sponsor of the Miss America pageant for Helen. I think before I got there, so I'm going to say maybe 60 or 59. And through, I think I have a picture into the 70s. During that period of time, the transition took place. And while Miss America was a major part of the social structure of our country, that concept changed dramatically as women's rights came more and more to the fore. Some people in that time frame started saying, okay, we were exploiting womanhood by making them appear in bathing suits or, to advertise their body rather than their brain or their mind or their capabilities. Now, interesting enough, the Miss America pageant, Miss America only appeared in a bathing suit once when she was in competition, never again in public. But that was what was laid upon that operation, the Miss America pageant. However, there were other business reasons that led us in the mid-70s to drop that sponsorship. The Miss America pageant was designed to hold people in the city of Atlantic City as a resort community a week to 10 days longer than the season. So the hotels and the civic leaders had sponsored this pageant in the early days in the 20s to get people to say, oh, we'll stay another week and watch the Miss America pageant on the boardwalk. Well, that was all well and good for the city of Atlantic City, and it had worked from a marketing standpoint for them. But the second week of September, which was a week after the season was supposed to end around Labor Day, was still early for us to introduce our new car. Here we were faced by having the best watched television program in the United States, or the second best. It ranked very, very high, first or second place in those years. But we couldn't show our new next year's car till 2 weeks later, because our announcements were always late September versus the second week. So we'd have a sneak television commercial where we'd lift up the cover and show the tire or the grill or something like that, or just talk about what's coming. Wait, you haven't seen anything yet. But we'd have to pay as much for that television commercial to produce it and then to run it on this very well-watched program. And you did not ever show the car. So from a business standpoint, it became less and less desirable for us, and we ultimately bid them fond farewell. This wasn't a business meet. Secondly, was this growing feeling that the Miss America pageant was no longer the type of thing that fit into the mood of the modern woman's needs and her place in the society. As many things happened, the Miss America pageant was copied. You got a successful idea and everybody wants to ride on your coattails. There was Miss Teenage America, Mrs. America, Miss Nude America, Miss Indian America, Miss Black America, Miss World, Miss Universe. And people say, well, now does Miss America go out now for Miss Universe? Is that a step along? It became confusing. And while it was an independent association, it had been highly successful for a period of time. And in my opinion, the automobile industry had really outlived this association with them. And while it continues today with other types of sponsors, it's still a very well-organized concept that didn't meet our marketing needs.
What about the shrine cars?
That was another interesting thing because Shriners have major parades. We early had an affiliation with them. Again, preceded my arrival on the scene. So late 50s or something like that, when the first time we approached that organization. And especially the senior body of the Shrine, which is the international officers, had a convention, and that was probably one of the longest parades that the Shriners would have. There would be regional Shrine events and special anniversaries and things of that nature. But the Imperial Council each July drew the largest body of Shriners.
Would that be in a different city?
And it would be in a different city based on the newly elected
potentate,
imperial potentate. And if he was, operating someplace in the Chicago area, he'd have to pick a major city to house a large convention. So yes, you'd go from town to town, and you'd bring maybe 200 cars with you.
Would those be
and
convertibles?
they would be convertibles. It was a really, that was an open air type of thing. And up until 75, when we quit building convertibles, that's what we used mainly as parade cars. And we would decorate them with the name of the potentate of the local city or state, his emblem, and the name of his temple. And we found a great quantity of these people bought our cars. In fact, one time trying to say, was this a worthwhile endeavor for Oldsmobile to be involved in? They ran a survey of Shriners and next door neighbors of Shriners. The trick was saying, okay, if you live in neighborhood X, the guy next door to you probably has about the same type of income you do, or he wouldn't have a house in the same neighborhood as you would do. So what is the ownership of our product versus somebody else who immediately lives next to those people? And we found out that Shriners had bought Oldsmobiles 2.5 times more than their neighbors did. So our years and years of participating in this organization, we feel had paid off, because they would say, well, Oldsmobile's done this for us. I got to look at that car, or it was a good car, or I drove in it. By gosh, it was interesting, fantastic. And we found that even though we were not allowed to advertise, any Shrine member of Oldsmobile or General Motors couldn't say advertise to Shriners because it was a non-business organization. The awareness that you represented that organization and that you provided them with this need for their conventions swept the United States and did a sales job for us in a quiet way. Another group of people. One time, when Mr. Jack Trainer was his own manager in Portland, Oregon, the Lions Club of America, I don't know their proper full title, had a national convention in Portland. And Jack asked for a number of parade cars, 75 or something like that. And they were approved as a special event, and the cars showed up and they were serviced and decaled and presented. And then on the closing ceremonies, he was asked to come and receive gratitude from them. Well, the Lions, bless their hearts, could say something commercial where the Shriners couldn't, even though they did act in the way I just mentioned. But the senior officer of the Lions Club said, I want you to meet Mr. Jack Trainer, who provided us with these 75 cars for our convention needs. I tell you, if any of you out there want to do something to show your gratitude, go home and buy an Oldsmobile. Well, that's another unpaid for commercial that you couldn't have gotten for, how many thousands of dollars. So group selling activities was at work in that action. We had influenced a group of people favorably toward our product.
What other types of groups would you appeal to or try to reach?
Well, many kinds. I've just named a couple of social clubs, but there were major sporting activities. Well, we've grown very well into golf. We did something for a number of years that was very, very golf oriented, and it was in connection with the Ladies Professional Golf Association, the LPGA. Now, their manager visited us and was trying to find some way to enhance the growth of this activity. And so Oldsmobile entered into an agreement that the top 10 money winners of female golfers in a year's time would be given an Oldsmobile to drive the ensuing year. Well, also part of our agreement was that their organizational name would appear on the door, their name would appear on the thing, so Kathy Whitworth and other famous golfers of the late 60s and early 70s who were the top 10 money winners, would drive all over the United States in our car with an advertisement on the side of the door. And therefore, people would look and see what that was all about and notice who she was and what the car represented, and it was an Oldsmobile. And so you found many, many ways. Another very interesting situation to me was that we had a large number of these cars available in the Miami area one year, and actually too many to be sold easily within those areas without having to ship them to a broader distance, and therefore coming up with additional costs. We wrote to all the Oldsmobile dealers saying, anybody going to the NADA convention, the National Automobile Dealers Association convention in Miami, that might want to buy one of these cars and drive it home, to let us know. Well, we got a couple of 187, I think, if I remember the number in my head properly, orders out of a couple of hundred cars we had in the area. And now during the NADA convention with all dealers and all competitive dealers in the United States could see their fellow Oldsmobile dealers driving around town, not using a taxi cab or the streetcar or the transportation provided by the convention, and say, well, how do you get that deal? Well, Oldsmobile set up for it. Well, why doesn't Chrysler do it for us or something? So even though it wasn't a retail customer, it made an impact on all the automobile dealers attending the National Automobile Convention that year. And so it's just, you look for ideas, and sometimes you went out and sought them. Sometimes, more often than not, they sought you, and you'd have to pick and choose and say, did you have the cars, and did you have, the budget to run that type of situation? One year, General Motors called us and said, you've been very, very involved in the shrine cars of America. Yes, we have an inquiry as General Motors for the black shrine. Would you provide cars for them? And then I had an extremely interesting experience of flying to Baltimore, Maryland, and interviewing the imperial potentate of the shrine for Black Americans, and we provided them their parade cars, and they had a little different program than the regular shrine did, but we were asked because we had an affiliation. Another year, the shrine was taking place in Canada, out of our Oldsmobile's jurisdiction. There's General Motors of Canada would handle this situation. Well, we would have to build the cars and ship them into Canada because there was no Canadian production plant for convertibles that year. And yet they asked us to provide a couple of people. I was one that went to instruct them how they could care for the cars, account for the cars. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were going to drive the cars. I asked to speak to all the drivers. And one of the little things I always try to cover was did they know a General Motors car? You know, they may have driven any type of a car, and please be, you know, don't say I've been driving for 30 years or something like that. This, no, the square key is the ignition, and the round base top key is the door lock. And there's always somebody with a Ford ownership that the key was marked the other way around. You try to put the wrong key in the ignition, and you'd break it off, and you'd stall the car, something like that. Plus, I'd always say, please take your driver's license out and look and see if it's valid. Well, here I was talking to policemen, and yet I told the sergeant I wanted to do this, and he said, they better all be valid. Well, here it was 150 Royal Canadian Mounted Police and two guys on driver's license who were not valid. So they had some time to go out and get new licenses so they could become, legalized drivers of our products in Canada, which is, to me, a humorous standpoint. But it was a chance again to be, here I spoke to a group of 150 men. And they learned how to put convertible tops up and down, how to drive Oldsmobiles, what you would do to make the car operate at slow parade speeds and not boil over. And whether they ever bought an Oldsmobile again or not, you didn't know, but it was in a form of,
Group selling.
second stage group selling. All this time, again, group selling activities, what kind of title is that? But it was moving toward this 1966, 1967 time when groups of dealers, marketing groups started, the idea was brought forth and started taking passion, which I participated in for 22 years before I retired. And then group selling, oh, you're in charge of all the marketing groups. Yeah, all right, it started to make sense finally after 6 or 7, 8 years on the job.
Was it, how long were you in Lansing then? Was that your last move?
Yeah, I finally got to Lansing in 1961, now after leaving Detroit.
And that was your last?
And then I was there from April 1961 to September 1989 when I retired.
Position as a
Well,
manager. So.
Up until the last 4 years, and I was promoted to director of marketing for a couple of years and director of field marketing as we moved into a that's not the word I want, we were opening up a brand new marketing staff, and Mr. Warren Christel was appointed director of marketing. And so rather than having one person as a director of marketing, they had an entire staff because of the very urgent need for us to develop that
Mr.
concept.
Christel, what type of person was he to work with?
Well, in a sense, I never really worked for Mr. Christel. I stayed with the sales side of the organization. But Mr. Christel brought to us knowledge of competitive industry. He had been a representative of a Japanese auto firm, a marketing manager for, I think, Toyota. He also worked at the General Motors Corporation at a staff level job. And many of the things we were doing in the 80s required major presentations to General Motors to determine if it was sound from a business standpoint, that we could make money on it and enhance General Motors or Oldsmobile's image and sale of our products. And so he was trained in marketing and had worked in it from our industry from a completely different viewpoint from General Motors and Oldsmobile, and could bring a broader based background to us than we had had before. I think most of the people came up through our own avenues, kind of like my career. Started off with Oldsmobile and pretty soon whatever it was you became, you just moved up a certain number of ladder steps and things like that. You may not have had an experience. Some men went away to Pontiac or Cadillac or came back or went away for a couple of years overseas to Europe, came back, but you would say that 95% of their career had been with Oldsmobile. Mr. Lane went away, and Mr. Berger, he didn't come back, but Mr. Lottie went away to England for a couple of years and came back to us and that kind of stuff.
Now, how was
But
he
Mr. Christel, Mr. Christel had not done that. He had worked in, at the corporate level and at the competitive level, so he brought a different viewpoint to us. Mr. Lottie had to me, an interesting time in England. I think he became very, very aware, or at least I was more directly reporting to him, and then if he had this talent before. I hadn't been aware of it. But he became so aware of the need to reestablish some very major basics that we all had to pull in the same direction. And there was a need for a marketing plan. There was a need for everybody having the similar objectives that we could no longer afford from a competitive standpoint to just go out and do what we've been doing for a lot of years. We all had to do something that led to a common goal: sell more cars, penetrate the market more. And it was a man right for the times, even though the times were a lot worse. And Oldsmobile sales fell off. They might have fallen off a lot more if he hadn't pulled us all back into a common direction.
You also.
And he stuck to it. I worked directly for him. I reported to him as the director of marketing, and then again as the director of field marketing in my last 4 years with Oldsmobile.
You worked for Berkeley too, didn't you?
Well, not immediately as a direct report. He was the general sales manager, and I either reported through the assistant general sales manager, marketing, John Fleming or Pete Gerosa or Elwood Schlesinger or Dave Neisch. But I had never directly reported to a general sales manager until my appointment as director of marketing, and I reported right to Mr. Bud Moore first of all, and then to Mr. Lottie. But he wanted me to take, he would ask the certain people at his table who would carry on an intellectual conversation with the other guests, the General Motors guests or the business guests he'd have at that table. One specific wife of one of our executives, Mrs. Mildred Clemison, married to George Clemison, our assistant general sales manager. For the East, we'd go to Chicago, which is the West. He'd want Mrs. Clemison to be at this table. Mr. Wolf, this is Mrs. Waite, wife of Harvey Waite, the assistant general sales manager. West will be here. Well, that's fine. Have her sit at that table over there. I said, well, here I am only a third level management trying to going over my assistant general sales manager, my general sales manager, to the boss saying, but they won't pay the expenses for Mrs. Clemison to go into the western half of the United States. Well, by gosh, they should. So I found myself in a little bit of a social cramp to try to explain his wishes to my bosses. Okay, kid, what are you trying to tell me now? That my wife's not good enough? No. He's going to have Professor Mildred was a Phi Beta Kappa, and she is in this subject, and he wants her to discuss that subject. Anyway, that wasn't to do with business. But that's how detailed-minded a man he was about providing. He wouldn't be at the table. He'd be up on the stage giving a speech or behind stage waiting to check on things, something like that. But he figured out to make this vice president happiest, he would have to have people there who could carry on a conversation gracefully or socially or intellectually. Those kind of people. I don't know. He was always thought of as being a tough boss. And yet, Helen, under his direction, Oldsmobile's product name and quality reputation and profitability were extremely strong. Now, when he first started being a general manager, he couldn't talk worth a hill of beans. He stumbled. He had to have his eye on the script all the time. He repeated himself. He cleared his throat. He stuttered. And recognizing that he now, as a general manager, would have to be somewhat able to present his products to the public, to the dealer body, to the corporate, to the General Motors board of directors, he immediately started taking voice lessons. Went through several, 2 or 3, I don't mean hundreds, voice teachers. And when he walked off that job, passed on. He was hired as a spokesperson. He became a capable, able, dramatic speaker. Funny story about that. We were in New York one time at an announcement show, mid-60s or something like that. And his voice teacher at that time told him that part of his, before he gave a major speech, he should sing the notes of the scale. Oh, warm up his throat or his voice. Now I can't sing, so I apologize for that noise I just made. But Mr. Wolfram wandered into the area where the cars were on display, and there wasn't anybody in there at the time that he could see. There was, however, a zone service manager in New York named Tom Spencer down on the floor underneath one of the cars trying to repair something that would cause some oil leak on the carpet. Well, he walked into the room, Mr. Wolfram did, and started this voice exercise, running the scales up and down for several minutes at a time. Tom didn't know who it was, and Mr. Wolfram didn't know there was anybody else in the room. Tom said, "Shut up that stupid noise." Well, you know. Wolfram, "Who's that?" Well, Tom recognized the voice of it. He rolled the rest of the way under the car and froze. Mr. Wolfram walked around trying to say who was insulting him. You know, never found Tom, thank goodness, hiding under the car. Spencer sweat a lot of blood. When Wolfram left, he got out there in a flat-out hurry. He said, "I don't know if I ever finished fixing the car." He said, "But I wasn't going to hang around there." He got fired. So he felt that, you know, that expressing himself like that would not be an acceptable maneuver. He was followed by Emmett Feely, who became our gentleman, who spent all of his life in Chevrolet until he came to Oldsmobile. And Emmett Feely introduced in New Orleans the 1967 big fanfare, big build-up. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you the best Oldsmobile, the best car we ever built in our entire history, the 1967 Chevrolet Oldsmobile. The whole world broke out laughing. We have a lot of Chevrolet duels. But he had 30 years of Chevrolet blood in, you know, and when he built up to that big momentous occasion, Wolfram would never have done that. Absolutely never in his life would have done that, you know. Well, everybody laughed with Mr. Feely, and he said, "What do you think I did?" And I said, "Mr. Feely, we got 50% of our dealers were Chevrolet duels, you know, and try to save his face a little bit, something like that." But it was just...
He was even ahead of the Chevrolet engine.
Yeah, I probably so. But I think Mr. Wolfram was with us a long time, the general manager. The rest of our general managers had shorter reigns of time. And I've worked in this announcement show, presentations to the general manager for the budget natures and major promotions I've been involved in. With each of them, except for the short reign of Mr. Baker, who died almost a week after he got here, 10 days, something like that. You know, I didn't ever know Mr. Baker, but nobody else, I don't think, really knew him that well. Those were with John Belts.
How was he to work with?
Oh, John Belts and Joe Sanchez had a, what I call, a Pied Piper ability about them, that people would follow them with just a blink of an eye, full trust, full is the boss, and yet they were Joe and John. They weren't Mr. Belts or Mr. Sanchez. Now, for what it's worth, Mr. Wolfram was nothing but Mr. Wolfram. You know, you had, you know, in your mind, he was the boss. The other guys were the boss, but they were like your brother or something like this. And John Belts spent a lot of his life in engineering, and, you know, when he was worked with the Toronado in his first introduction in '66 or something like this. He had a way with the press and with the dealers and with the employees that I didn't see again until Joe Sanchez came along with that same ability, just to charm. I don't mean insincerely either, just that you were, you know, you were not below him. You were equal. Your question was a good question. Let's think about the answer. What would you do? That kind of stuff. There was never anything but admiration for those two gentlemen.
No, you were also under Mr. Cook.
Oh, I sure did. I sure did. Yeah, I sure did. And Mr. Cook it was strange for Mr. Cook to come into our world of sales and merchandising. The engineers, and this is my perception, okay, and Mr. Cook's still alive, and I have a great respect for him. He and I happen to be paired in a scramble golf tournament. He plays much better golf than I do, but it was very interesting to me to perceive Mr. Cook came up and he said, well, I don't know anything about what you guys do. I've been a Manufacturing Manager. I've slugged out the plant and got these cars built for you guys to sell. But there was a certain time when a general manager in my head became the boss. And he'd say, so, well, what has my predecessor done? I said, well, Mr. Cook, you can do anything you want to do. Yeah, but what did my predecessor do? He wanted to do what somebody else had done. That was right. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. And I thought, today he's the general manager in my head, in my field, because he no longer had to say, well, I'll be safe and do what was done before. He'd now been on the job a year, 2 years, and it was now Bob Cook was general manager. He was general manager all the time. But there was the work that I did was so new to him that he had to rely upon our word that that was the way to do it, or the only way to do it, or something like that. But when we were sort of, well, you could do it this way or that way or this other way. You could do it on television, you could do it on a tour, you could do it in 3 cities, you can do it in 6 cities, you can let the regional managers go out and do it. You can just do it on, you take a tape with you. Oh. All right, so it wasn't just, there were options in our end of the business. His predecessor had done it that way, but it didn't mean he couldn't do it 1 of 3 or 4 other ways, or a new way completely. I think, like Bill Lane had been in the sales department when he became our general manager. There was really nothing new in him. He was Oldsmobile blood in him, but Mr. Cook was Oldsmobile blood in Mr. Cook, but it was a different kind of blood. Yeah. The moment there was something going on there, that was his field, and he could just knock that over without any trouble at all. And it just took him a little while to see what all those other crazy staffs did and why they existed. And if they were needed, that's my perception of it. He was a very enjoyable person. Today he's one of our dealers, friends of his that went to JMI together back in their college, Mr. Cook. He's got a couple of partners.
That's right, down there.
Yeah.
Venice.
Yeah, and one was a former dealer, but they all 3 of them, I think, went to GMI together. So I think that's an interesting cycle up through their individual careers. Senior years, why they can join together in a
Well, I
partnership.
mentioned with his background, but at least I think it'll keep him happy.
Oh yes, especially after losing a wife he's so very close to.
He has.
I know that, but there was a period of time when in between there, it's extremely hard for him. I think this was good to have something to do in a field he was closely involved with, friends to support him. Yeah.
Bob, now you at one time worked with Gifford too, didn't you?
As a contemporary. Interesting enough, I actually worked for Gifford. Good point. Yeah. When I was manager of group selling, I reported to the advertising manager. Now, Helen, I don't know how all that came about, but at one time when I first came to Lansing in '61, there was a 3-way switch. Lloyd Grove was the group selling activities manager, but Lloyd Grove had been the advertising manager. And when Mike Mehring came back for a second try at Oldsmobile, they gave him the job as the advertising manager, which was several notches lower than he'd had, general sales manager, of course. Lloyd was advertising manager, was kind of bumped down. I don't think they took any money away from Lloyd, but he was given the title of group selling activities manager. For the first time anybody in Oldsmobile's history had that title. And then when I came to take that job, Lloyd became the assistant zone manager in Buffalo, where I had been 2 years previously. Fred Hawsworth, who followed me in Buffalo, took the assistant zone manager's job in Detroit, and I took Lloyd's job in Lansing. So there was a little pinwheel 3-way move. But my boss was the advertising manager. And Dick Leckrone held that job, and Roland Gifford held that job. Who else? Well, anyway, at the time, Ted Madzia became the advertising manager, which is about 67 now, okay? For 6 years, I reported to the advertising manager. There's a third person that I'm not pulling out of my head someplace along the line. John Fleming, who was then our assistant general sales manager of marketing, said to Ted, Jarboe won't be reporting to you anymore. He's being moved up equal with you and will report to me as you do. That's when John Fleming turned me loose to build the dealer marketing group concept. And so then the advertising managers, Butch Bunker and Ted Madzia and Dick Lynch and John Steve Machine is I know I'm missing right now. He's former zone. No, he was a former zone manager, and when he left us, he was zone manager in Cincinnati, and then he went to Florida and retired early. John Hamill. We were all contemporaries on job level status, reporting to a similar boss. Job, I think, was created, and Lloyd was put in it, and then moved out fairly soon, so that there would be a respectable title for Mike if he had made it on his second go around. That didn't work out. Another story, and I don't know a lot about that, but up until that period of time, the job of group selling was somebody in the lower levels of advertising did some of these things at a on-scene basis. They didn't travel out to these places and try to make them better or something like that. And I think that I was selected because as assistant zone manager in Detroit, I had to work on the announcement show, which brought me in contact with Mr. Wolfram in '59 and in '60. And they were evidently looking for somebody. They wanted to move Lloyd out to a job equal to the pay he was getting as advertising manager, and they were looking for somebody to replace him. And that I fell into place because I had done that type of work on the announcement shows that Mr. Wolfram was personally involved in from the Detroit level. And so I could come in and know that work. Even though I wasn't running it from Lansing, I was doing it under instructions from Lansing, but I was doing it in visibility of the corporation and of Lansing. And it was very, they'd say, if there was a panel about how do you handle things, well, Jarboe coming up here and we just said 5 or 6 guys going to talk about how we can make the announcement show better or something like that. I had some insight into the workings and some input into the thing before I got on the job. And one of the first years or so after we were through with the announcement show, I got to fly home from the last stop on the General Motors plane. I wasn't out in advance getting set up in the next town. And Sheldon Moyer of the Leo Burnett agency was talking to Mr. Wolfram. And Sheldon told me the story later. Mr. Wolfram never told me the story. Mr. Wolfram, according to Sheldon, said, Shell, Jarboe did a pretty good job for the first year, didn't he? Well, he did a good job. Why didn't you tell him so? Oh, you think so? Well, yes. Huh. Well, I might. I don't know if Mr. Wolfram said it, but that's what the story Sheldon told me later on. Then he walked up to John Moyer's plane. Good job. Turned around, walked back to his seat, sat down. So, that was a compliment to me. That was, Mr. Wolfram to have to recognize that it wasn't, that was your job. You better do a good job. That's what you're being paid for. Yeah, and there was no skin off my nose about it. Somebody else can flatter you and you're not doing a good job and waiting to knife you in the back. There's all kind of that kind of stuff. It doesn't.
And what fellow was Sheldon Moyer?
Well, Sheldon Moyer, probably one of my best friends, and even my wife Dorothy and I still see Neva Moyer even now, many years after Sheldon's death. Sheldon provoked me first in the 1961, 2-3 years when I first came to Oldsmobile in Lansing. I had known him briefly, not in too much contact with him. I was assistant zone manager in Detroit because their offices were the same building as our offices and things like that. But I found that I got an awful lot of my instructions and information from Sheldon rather than, say, from Morgie Seaton, who was my boss. Sheldon would sit in on a lot of the staff meetings with Mr. Wolfram, be in a lot of the planning meetings in Detroit or on a GM plane someplace like to the New York Automobile Show. They'd do other kind of business. And Sheldon, at least in my business, and I think probably other people as well, but I don't know that for a fact, he would come back and say, oh, Bob, you're to do this. We were talking to Mr. Wolfman the other day, and a part of the plan has to be implemented. You should get 25 cars here, or you should move the dates between these two cities because he now has to go to a corporate meeting, or, some readjustment, some new schedule, some new plan of directions. I say, well, I hadn't heard about that. He said, well, I'm telling you about it. And I said, well, why doesn't, well, Seaton didn't know either. The line of communication was, Wolfram had said it, Shell had perceived that he wanted it done, and knew that I was the guy who was supposed to wind up doing it.
Was Sheldon Moyer then the accounting secretary?
He was then the accounting executive, then he became the entire, the manager of the entire organization before his untimely death. But once I got past that it wasn't Sheldon trying to run our business, that it was Sheldon being bright enough to know that somebody better follow up on a twist or a turn, or saying, well, if we're going to do that, that means that this other thing has to be scrapped. And that he had, that he only had his well wishes of the organization at heart, and he was doing something that no other Oldsmobile employee, well, he could go tell my boss, but then my boss would have to tell me, I don't know, So it was kind of a funny feeling for a while. But I found out that he was also a great line of communication to the bosses. If we were out someplace like that, I say, Sheldon, you got to tell them the next time you go to a meeting, because I didn't go to those meetings in those early years, that this is too much, or that's not enough, or that, we can come down here and do this, provide station wagons at the Masters Golf Tournament, because Cadillac doesn't make a station wagon. But the money we're spending at the Masters Golf Tournament doesn't get us bean soup, because nobody has announced the official car but Cadillac. And that, if we want to go along as second cousin and just be a help to General Motors, that's one thing, but it's not enhancing our visibility for our product. Oh,
He was just,
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So, organizationally wise, I might say the same thing to Seaton, but I would say the same thing to Sheldon, because I had a stronger feeling that would get back up to Mr. Wolfham's here, whereas Morgan might do something at his level or tell the general sales manager about it. Well, don't forget about it. We want to get the free tickets to get in there or something like that. Well, that's fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. That wasn't the idea. But he was in Lansing almost like 3 or 4 days a week. He was a partner of ours. He was a communicator. He was had great thought. He traveled the entire announcement show tour, things like that. So he had the ear of the management team. He knew the changes. He knew the product. He knew advertising thing he was about ready to sell the bosses. And I'm interested today. I'll say to myself, gee, why isn't Ted Jordan here? Well, it's a different world. It's a different man. He runs Leo Burnett in a different function. And many of his predecessors the same way. Jack Ryan didn't come to Lansing that much either. So it wasn't just Sheldon's way of operating. They had other accounts as far as Sheldon was concerned. This was a major one. It's the one he felt he should nurse and take care of.
Well.
Yeah, he serves it very well.
now you worked with Val Karate too.
Oh, yeah. Val, was our account executive for over 25 years. And one of the greatest things, and still talk to Val today, Val was so enthusiastic and so determined to get things done on time that he served Oldsmobile dramatically. And Mr. Wolfram did a wonderful thing with Val Karate upon his leaving Leo Burnett. Gave Val a 25-year service ring, General Motors Oldsmobile employee ring.
What a beautiful gesture.
And there ain't too many, anybody else I know of, but I don't know everything. Because Val would work 25 years in the Oldsmobile account.
Wonderful gesture, especially from both.
And Mr. Karate wears that with pride to this day.
Well, Bob, what I was going to ask you about the talking about it, just touched on it a moment ago. Well, you said the golf tournament now, but the Bing Crosby, are we in that as much as we used to?
Okay.
Set.
Hell, the answer is no. but there are some ramifications to it. So I might say yes to you with some strings tied to it, all right? Very interestingly, remember I mentioned the name of Webb Hoffman?
Yes.
When I went to Buffalo, Webb stayed in Lansing. Well, he continued this training that we did with new zone members, and then he worked into sales promotion. When I came back 4 years later, 2 years in Buffalo, 2 years in Detroit, Webb had just gone out to a zone. But he'd been doing a lot of this group selling thing. He'd been the man on the scene at the Bing Crosby golf tournament. He'd been the man on the scene at the Miss America pageant. So they called him back from the zone to train me on 2 or 3 major things where Lansing management was directly involved. So when Webb and I flew to Monterey to meet the Crosby associates that put on this national tournament that Oldsmobile was the official car for, Webb introduced me to all those people and brought me up to speed and showed what had to be done. And I think I went personally for 16 years. I went as an individual. It was a big job. But again, it gave me an opportunity to work with many of the dealers I'd worked with when I was hired in, 10, 12 years before that, 1950. I grew up in San Francisco. It was kind of like going back to home to be on the Bay again, a lot of things. And I didn't play golf. To this day, I don't play golf. And people always say, oh, you're going to the Crosby. I can carry your golf clubs for you. It was, you're up at 6 in the morning. You'd be sure all those cars were going to function. They had a lot of golfers who went out early for practice. You had to be sure all the drivers were there and they were not intoxicated or something else, fit to drive your products. And then you'd wait till late at night when the last guys were coming off the course, and you collect your cars and check them all over and be sure everyone ran mechanically at nighttime. But it was a pleasant thing. And then ultimately, one of my bosses said, well, why do you need a guy in exhibit display like Don Winter to handle your special events if you go out there every year? You might as well, let's get rid of Don Winter. We don't need him on the payroll. And I said, no. What you're saying now is that I'm going to have to go to the Masters. I'm going to have to go to the Shrine of Prayer. I'm going to have to, 20 other places where anytime we had over 100 cars, we sent a man because we had a big financial investment in product on the scene, and somebody had to know how to take care of those things. Oh, okay. So I stopped going to the Bing Crosby golf tournaments, but we became involved at a time in a need to cut costs and expenses. One particular year prior to that time, Crosby said, we have a fine offer from Chrysler. They're going to pay us to let us be, they're going to put some money into the Crosby charities. And we decided to lose our long years experience with you, but since you have no wish to add this kind of money to the kitty, we're going to go with Chrysler. Well, that year, there was so much trouble for the Crosby people, they begged us to come back. And so our association only lost 1 year. The dealers would come and say, I want my car. I've just sold it. They had to take it away from Bob Hope or something like that. Well, what's Mr. Hope going to do? He's a big celebrity under Big Crosby, and he hasn't got a car because the Chrysler dealer wanted it back. Well, Oldsmobile didn't have dealer-owned cars there. They had factory-owned cars. Then they sold the dealers afterwards. Anyhow, our association went along, and I was there about 16 different years and presented the trophy award and the card to the winner the closest to the pin contest and many things of that nature. And then it became a time when we had to reduce our business expenses. And one of the things that was up for grabs was the money we spent at the Crosby tournament. And yet there'd been such a continuous flow of association there, unlike the Miss America pageant, where we were losing marketing touch through relationship of who was Miss America and that we couldn't show new cars on the air. There was another massive crowd of people. an area where General Motors didn't sell cars very well, where we could really sell cars out to Monterey. And it's because of our association, much like that Shrine Association, people would buy those cars. That I held a long meeting with the Oldsmobile dealer marketing group in Northern California. They had a super group. And as a result of this 5 or 6 hour free ranging idea brainstorming concept, the sponsors became the Oldsmobile dealers in Northern California rather than the Oldsmobile division of General Motors. Our put was to assure them every year they'd have the needed number of cars for that activity, was to advertise in some of the function at a lower level we had before, then they would advertise. And one of the interesting things, Helen, was that if people knew Bob Jarboe, didn't mean they'd buy an Oldsmobile because I didn't sell Oldsmobiles, and I'd go away back to Lansing. But if they knew the dealer in Monterey, the dealer in Gilroy, the dealer in, you name it, in all those communities up and down the coast, Redwood City, or where it would be, then they had a point of reference where they could buy a car from a man who would contribute some time and effort in association with the Bing Crosby Golf Tournament. And I got, I think, I cut the money and also became a little bit more intelligent that this gave a closer reference to the ultimate seller of our product. To this day, the Oldsmobile dealers in Northern California are the transportation sponsors of the AT&T Pebble Beach golf tournament. Mrs. Crosby, the second Mrs. Crosby, after Bing passed on, over some argument between the local group and she and her lawyers, declined to give them the right to use the name Bing Crosby, which she had under his will, his signature, his face, the pipe, and they no longer call it the Bing Crosby Golf Tournament. Although everybody who goes there still, it's up here in your head. AT&T has had a hard time because no one calls it AT&T. They still call it, I'm going to the Crosby, I'm going to the Clambake. Those terms are no longer usable by that group, but yet they still maintain a fantastic importing of money to their charities. And two of her sons, not her stepsons, from the first Crosby marriage, Nathaniel Crosby, at least, and one of his brothers, played there. They've had the same kind of argument with their mother. And she runs a golf tournament using Bing Crosby name off the East Coast in the Carolinas someplace, and it's so little publicized. And it's only for a very exclusive thing, and you have to be like a CEO of a major corporation to go there and play in the thing, and you have to give them $100,000 to get you in the thing to charity or something like that. You never heard of the Bing Crosby golf tournament anymore, but that's just alive and well, not too well, on the East Coast someplace. So,
Run again.
that Cadillac can look different than the Buick, can look different than the Oldsmobile. Most all other GM divisions have a specific vehicle to their line that nobody else has. Oldsmobile does not have that at the present time, although there's plans in the mill to be considered down the line kind of a situation. So you could have a car like the Buick Reatta you could promote and say, okay, we are different, or we're unique, or we're distinct, or no one else has it. The actual exterior design of the car, the coloring, the wheel discs, the exterior small parts of the overall design of the car will come out with the same car. Like our Calais was also carried by Pontiac and Buick, and for a long, long time, the Pontiac Grand Am, built in the same line as the Cutlass Calais, outsold the Calais because of exterior styling and price and a few other things. But it was different in the consumer's mind because of the way they packaged it and marketed it. Well, today, the Buick car in that line is gaining a lot of success. So besides the manufacturing and the visual similarities, then how do you present it to the consumer. Part of the marketing idea, which the word I like much better than the word advertising. And some people said to me, well, it's not the same thing. And a lot of people may think it is, but a lot of people know it's not. And they have a thing they call the marketing mix, the elements that you put together to make something acceptable to a consumer. And product is one of them. Price is another one. Place, now we're getting kind of fancy because we're trying to start with all P's. But the place might mean the distribution channel. Where can you get that product? Can you only get it by ordering it through Sears catalog? Can you get it in any department store, any drugstore? Can you get it only at Oldsmobile dealers? See, our place, we don't sell a car at the factory. We don't sell it off the street corner. We sell it at an Oldsmobile franchise dealer outlet. So the place is different. Now, how can you use place as a marketing mix? Well, recently, Acura was come out by Honda, but they didn't give it to the Honda dealers to sell. They said anybody wants the Acura franchise would have to build their own facility, get their own sales force, make a display floor, develop an overhead that makes you stay in business and compete against all other dealers, including the Honda dealer. So now there's two General Honda products available in this community, one under the Acura sign, one under the Honda sign. General Motors did that for decades. There's a Buick here, and a Pontiac here, and a Cadillac here, and a Chevrolet here, and a General Motors truck and coach someplace else. Do you see what I'm saying to you? So now all of a sudden there's a new businessman in town, and there's only going to be so many people who buy a car. That means everybody else, if he's successful, is going to get a few less cars sold. So the third P in the marketing mix, the place, or the distribution channel where the place you can get the car, can be utilized as a marketing tool. The fourth P is promotion. Now we got product, price, place, and promotion. Promotion everybody knows about. Product everybody knows about, but they don't make such a big noise about it. They do, but you hear all the big razzmatazz and the money and the expenditures and the TV commercials and the blowing of horns, the sales and all that kind of this week only and get it before December 23rd is the promotion. Includes advertising. But you see, advertising has to have a product, it has to have a price, it has to have a place to go to get the product. So you take those four elements, the four P's, and that makes up marketing. Now, there's a fifth P in my mind, and I understand from a lot of professors of marketing, they still teach basic marketing 101 as the four P's. I'm not saying I'm right or they're wrong or they're right and I'm wrong, anything like that, but we're working toward a fifth P, which we now, to be fancy, stay within the P category, calling it probe or research. What does the customer want? Not what do you want the customer to buy? What does the customer want to buy? Do you have that? Look at the great demand for trucks all of a sudden. Just all of a sudden, people turned in cars and bought trucks. People who didn't have trucks, like Oldsmobile Division, lost a whole ton of old Oldsmobile owners because the appeal to the suburban people and to young families, they could have a small truck with power steering and air conditioning and all the intricacies of a car, but it would be able to be used to move things around when they moved or they picked up or the gang someplace else like that. It gave a lot more flexibility, and it was acceptable in the suburbs that replaced station wagons in the buyer's mind. Well, all of a sudden, now we have this year, next year, moved into the truck business again, because we didn't have a product at any kind of a price at any place to be promoted. And so people walked away from those dealers and walked into guys who sold trucks because it became an acceptable means of transportation to the consuming public. So the research department or the probers better find out if they can what's an acceptable thing and don't just blindly say, well, people are going to want the same thing, so we're going to give them another 88 next year. Understand what your consumer wants and get closer to providing it to him. That's a real study, not just build anything you want to build and then start advertising it.
Those days are past.
They are past. And the Japanese in our industry brought that concept along with them. And we're trying to catch up in my mind.
What about our quality
Well,
compared with other? Before
Helen, you might find today, and there must have been a time of measurement, and again, I don't have a great degree of knowledge in the manufacturing end of our business, where to get great quantities of cars to meet these tons of vehicles that were sold, 10, 11 million car industry in the United States, that for some reason or other, quality slipped. And when a competitor at a lower price had a car who had better quality, the consuming public didn't accept the cars as readily. And we had some fantastic years of problems. Now, everybody can point with fantastic degrees of success of better quality. But does the consumer perceive that yet? No. All the surveys are out there say, well, the Japanese cars are better built. Today, that's not necessarily true. But somehow or other, you got to use the members of that marketing mix to tell the consumer somehow, either get him in to drive that product, come in and compare this car with, or you use the price. Do you know that the Japanese cars now cost more than American cars? Or the place, which is not readily available in my mind to give you an example, but we are getting more dealers in towns where you go to Los Angeles, you might find 16 Japanese car manufacturer dealerships to 5 for Oldsmobile. Much more convenient for the consumer to go to because they are saturated in that marketplace. That's where they started, and that's where they've grown, and that's where they dominate. And our Oldsmobile dealers in Los Angeles advertise. Do you know that Oldsmobile outsells Japanese cars? Well, they don't in Los Angeles, but they do in the United States. And they have a little figure down at the bottom of their ad that points out what the reference quantities are and what year it is and what documentation it is. But they're trying to prove to the consumer that, hey, if everybody's buying this kind of car, why aren't you looking at it? Maybe you're overlooking something. Think about Oldsmobile. And then promotion, you gotta be able to promote. If you'll recall a current television commercial, it's explaining to the public that Oldsmobile has a program called the Oldsmobile Edge, where at 1,500 miles or 3 months' time, you're not satisfied with your car, you can bring it back. No, nobody else is doing that. That's really a dramatic difference with our product that can be marketed. It's new. It hasn't been out there long enough. How many people have observed it and changed their mind or made them think to give it a try? They tested it a year or so ago in a couple of markets, and I think they had, I don't know, 50, 60 cars brought back in exchange. The people were happier with their second car. They try to show them that Oldsmobile will stand behind their product. Therefore, we're proud of our quality. That's how you tell people you got better quality. But it's going to take a lot of money to promote that because the mind doesn't change that fast overnight. The perception is still that Japanese build better cars than Americans. Now, Buick got on the list of the top 10 best built cars or something like that. And they're advertising the heck out of it. Best built American car. And it's helping the Buick division of General Motors attain some growth in the marketplace. Because they can say, yeah, what do you mean? We didn't run this test. This test is run by this independent concern, and here are the cars, and Buick is on that list. It may be in 9th place, but it's in the top 10. And there hadn't been any General Motors cars up there for a number of years. So it's a constant battle. It's not something you do once and wipe your hands and say, well, that job is over with. Because there's a counterplay from your competitors, and there's a different markets change. And today, I would say the cost of doing business, to be even in the business, you better have a low finance plan and some money back promotions. Everybody else does. If you can't come to the ballpark with, oh yeah, you can get a finance that's 6.9 or rather than 12 or 13% or something like that. Or it will give you $1,000 back on this car during this months. You don't get off by saying, well, we're too good for that, or we don't need that. Because the consumer can go right next door, or maybe in the same dealership who carries 2 or 3 or 4 lines and say, well, then I'll take that car over there. We've been successful in doing something called the Regional Initiative. Now, this is another incentive on top of incentives. How long can you do something like that financially and, weather the storm? So we don't just do it, but we have to make a presentation to a committee, which is involved with the general sales manager, the general marketing manager, and the comptroller. Be sure that there's still money available to Oldsmobile, General Motors, by doing this kind of thing. But you may have seen a promotion in around this area where you can get 2 free tickets on Delta Airlines, any place in the United States. You bought a Cutlass Supreme out of the Detroit area advertising. Okay, well, besides that, you could still get low finance or some money back. But you could also get 2 tickets to Miami or, where do you want to go that Delta Airlines flew if you bought a car. East Coast, we ran one, you could get a year's supply of gasoline. Helen, the sales results on those 2 promotions, free airlines and free year supply of gasoline, so far increased the dealers in those 2 regions that ran that promotion over the 2 regions that didn't happen to be running promotions at that time, in the central region and the western region. But it was just so dramatic that you knew that this other added incentive that brought hundreds of people into Oldsmobile dealerships, that you had broken through the clutter, got your message out there. You had something different that they could get no place else but there. Oh yeah, the moment somebody heard about that, they were going to run the same thing for Toyota or for somebody else, okay? We were told, don't do that airline thing. Buick tried it and it didn't work out. Study the Buick's program. Okay, that's a fair enough request from General Motors. They had another GM division, had experience with airline tickets, and it was not successful. Why should we go pour money back down the tubes? Something's already been tried out. But in our study, we found out what we hoped was a small thing that would teach us something from the Buick experience. They offered 1 free ticket. Now, how many wives are going to say that? Yeah, you can go to Acapulco, but I'll stay home. Or where are you going to go pick $1,000 out of your pocket to buy the ticket for the spouse or the rest of the family? Or if you wanted to go to Hawaii, how much is that going to cost you? And how many people are not going, even though Michigan State's going to go there for the Loa Bowl? That's a big hunk of money. But once there were 2 tickets available, oh, well, Mom and I can go do this or that or the other thing. Yeah, it costs a little bit more money now. You're right, you understand? But it worked when you put the second ticket into play. The year supply of gasoline, we interviewed 200 people in Boston, in Washington, D.C., in Philadelphia, in New York, and in Charlotte. Those are the zones, cities, major cities in the eastern region. We said, if you could have your choice of the following 5 things, if you bought a new car, you could get these things free. What would you select? You don't have to buy a car. Give us your opinion. So we give them, they're all of equal value now. Okay, it might have been a thing code. I don't remember what they were. Your supply of gasoline, 2% financing, such and such and such and such. And I'd have to go dig out the files to see what they were. Well, in every town, the majority of the people said a year's supply of gasoline. Well, that was the 5th P, the probe. So we gave them what they said they would do, what representative number of people said they would do, and it worked in their area. It worked in their area. That was marketing. It was research. It was figured out. It was nobody else in the area did that thing during that period of time because we were the first ones out with the idea. Now it's like the Miss America pageant, getting the Mrs. America, Miss Indian America. Now there's going to be regional issues by everybody else, and somebody has to think of another idea that's unique and different that makes the people say, well, I can get this marketing group car. No one else has got this front end grill, or has got this special interior, or has got this special, whatever it might be, that makes you different than your neighbor. So you need a creative mind and an engineering mind and a marketing mind, and put all those things together and make it work, pass it out. And hopefully that's what is being developed by Oldsmobile in the decentralization of the job I had all those years. See, that was done by me and some sales promotion people in Lansing. Now it's being done with a zone marketing manager and a regional marketing manager in most every zone and in all regions. And they don't have to think about the United States. They have to think about only this zone or only this region. And what is acceptable to the people in this area. And in the half of this western region, in the Memphis and Dallas zone, they're running right now a promotion with a major department store that is available in those areas. You buy a 1990, I think it's a Cutlass Calais, you can get a $750 gift certificate from this major department store. In fact, in the television commercial, there's a gigantic Christmas tree and it has 7 or 8 things on it, all of which add up to $750. You could get everything on that tree and then visually, oh my God. And that area is selling. The last report I saw, which is maybe 10 or 12, 15 days ago, when I was visiting Oldsmobile for a brief moment to get some information on my retirement, they were up 13% business, while the rest of the United States was down 13% at Cutlass Calais, or there's a 26% swing that regional initiative is working for those dealers who have put money through their marketing groups into that campaign, along with Oldsmobile support. So the whole thing that started off with just 5 dealers in St. Louis or something like that is now, just grown like Topsy as a child into a great big, gigantic, powerful marketing force that can direct efforts that are timed right. We used to run a television commercial that would show somebody going down Aspen in a skis, and the dealers in Florida would be just irate because they got no snow in Florida. Well, now we have the capability, and the Florida dealers want to run something at the beaches of Miami in the background or the beaches of Florida in the background. They can do that. They can make their own television commercials. They don't have to rely upon Oldsmobile's national spots or something like that.
Do you feel, Bob, that the dealer council is as effective as they used to be, or as worthwhile?
I do, sincerely. I got to tell you that I have not personally had a lot of work with the dealer council, but with an element of the dealer council that formed what we worked with called the Dealer Marketing Council, which was made up of major dealers from all the regions who really were involved in marketing groups and in marketing their cars, plus 2 members of the dealer council. So we weren't trying to override the dealer council. They were elected by dealers, okay? But the dealer marketing group, except for those 2 members, the other 5 or 6 people were appointed by us with their business experience. But we would take all these plans to them and lay it out with them and get their input and their involvement and their adjustments and things like that. And now there's not only a dealer marketing committee, there's a dealer service committee and a dealer product committee, all who have dealer council members serving on them. One group reports to our chief engineer, Larry Lyons, to help him with the product planning. Another one reports to Ivan Stebbins, Assistant General Sales Manager Service, on product quality and the repairs and things of that nature. So the dealer council, while they can come as a body and explain what points of difference they have between the manufacturer and the dealer body and what we're not providing, what we should provide, can also be specifically involved in the production and distribution of what would help them get those things down the line. Yes, they tell you about this thing that's already been a part of our plan, being good or bad, but now they can also say what you're going to do in the near future. You should adjust it, or you shouldn't do it, or you should wait for a timing. So I was deeply involved with that element, which had a dealer council flavor to it. It was a subcommittee of the dealer council. Somebody else who worked directly with the dealer council, Johnny Martabano, or somebody of that nature might be better to answer that kind of question if you need it for either personal knowledge or for, for historical knowledge.
From your point of view,
The last year, Helen, of my employment, which went a couple of months, 2.5 months over my 65th birthday, because I was a deadline on finishing a certain major project, I was kind of pulled out of the mainstream. Dave Waddy says, you do this, you get this dealer marketing group package number 2 done through the corporation approval so it can be launched with the N1990 product. And I fell away from a lot of things I've been doing. And even in a year's time, Helen, this is a fast-moving industry. And the specifics, to tell you what I thought about the Deer Council, I might have to go back to 2 years ago or 4 years ago. And that's not going to give me today's truth. And what I would tell you today is not going to be true a year from now or 5 years from now, because it's like that program in Dallas. If everybody sees you do it, they're going to copy if it works. So you no longer have something that's unique. And you got to keep finding unique things. Or doing them better than somebody else. It's like, well, okay, we gave 2 tickets instead of giving 1 ticket. That was the same thing, but it had a twist to it.
fortunately acceptable too.
Yeah, yeah.
Bob, now you were here, Wolford was general manager.
I had that privilege, yes.
What did you think of him as a general manager?
I served Mr. Wolfram in a unique capacity. In my viewpoint, okay, I didn't report directly to him, but I worked very closely with him for almost on a daily basis for a certain period of time every year, and that was in the presentation of the new car announcement show. I would say to you that Mr. Wolfram probably got his biggest vacation enjoyment, kind of off the job kind of thing, by being on the job during the new car announcement time. That musical numbers, he was very involved, his involvement with the Wharton Center at Michigan State University, the opera, and the theater were the epitome and entertaining things to his life. I'd see that man who would work almost around the clock in engineering a new product or something like this, sit in his shirt sleeves on a cane chair, face backwards, if you know what I'm talking about, with his arms on the back of the chair and his back was, not sitting on the chair properly. Watch a rehearsal of a very intricate dance number or song and dance number and just thoroughly enjoy himself, completely relaxed, away from the business. And yet that song and dance all had words about the new Oldsmobile or the change, and if there was any product information spoken of improperly, he would be sure the lyrics were changed or the reference was changed or something like that.
Those were extravaganzas.
They were extravaganzas. I was gone from Lansing as a kind of a front man on this situation for maybe 7 weeks, 8 weeks at a time. We traveled on a gigantic train. All the new cars were on the train, all the properties of the theater presentation. It was really a Broadway show taken around the United States on tour. We had hotel rooms to book for the cast and the speakers and the crew and the Oldsmobile executives who came in when they were set up for. And while we were on a train from Atlanta to Dallas, they'd fly back to Lansing and get ready for the new product introductions and things like that. Just to show you one man's opinion, and not to tell you who's right or anything of this nature. Mr. Metzel, Harold Metzel, followed Jack Wolfram as general manager, correct?
He was the next man I was going to ask you.
Well, okay. Mr. Metzel, in the first year he was general manager, called us up there and said, now, let me get you guys straight. One of the things that I missed the most when Mr. Wolfram was general manager and I was chief engineer was having the boss here when we were trying to put a new product out. And he was always off running around the country someplace doing show business. Now, you're not going to do that to me. I'm not leaving Lansing. One of the most important things that has to be done is to produce the new car right and get it out by announcement time. And the general manager, in his opinion, should be right there every day watching that thing get done and helping solve those mechanical, manufacturing, procurement, plant production problems, union problems, not leaving it to the chief engineer or to another staff head. And so he says, you got to figure out a way where I can be involved in that show and not leave Lansing. Well, we did a national telecast. One day he went down to Detroit and he stood up there for about 2.5 hours. I mean, he didn't talk during that time, but as a panel presenting television commercials and photographs of production techniques and new cars. And he went back home and he was all through the announcement show tour as far as he was concerned was over. And we played in 32 cities and on screens. Well, it was a horrible mess. Some places it blacked out. Some places the boss's face came out green. I don't mean 100% of the time, but there were just technological problems. But as far as Mr. Metzel was concerned, he had done that part of announcing the new car and was available for it, in his opinion, from an engineering viewpoint. Of course, Mr. Wolfram had an engineering background too. But Mr. Wolfram enhanced that and found it more shows and night shows and more cities and things like that. He wouldn't take a vacation, but he could relax and enjoy that during that period of time. And there were just fabulous crowds of people, Helen, who came and who admired, who wrote about the Oldsmobile announcement shows. Okay, they served a part again, kind of like this marketing story I told you about, in the 50s and the 60s and half past through the 70s, of being an Oldsmobile extravaganza that was available to everybody. Entertainment. Boy meets girl. Boy has car. Boy loses car. Boy loses girl. Boy finds car. Boy gets girl. Year and year and year after that. Well, now the cost of those things grew and raised, and we couldn't do them in X number of cities, X number of nights, and we reduced them down to 8 shows to 6 shows, being all over, being maybe over in 3 weeks' time instead of 8 weeks' time, but having time frames the management team could get back to Lansing and go about the business of producing the new products. And it changed and altered and digressed from the initial concept of the thing. Mr. Wolfram was an extremely hard man, a taskmaster to work for. But he exemplified quality. Oldsmobile was a product name to be proud of, and it was basically because he demanded perfection. What do I mean be a hard man? Before I came up here on the job, and really, the job he pulled me up on was to run the announcement shows, and it all developed into other areas. It became part of that group selling concept, which I expanded on, things like that. He called me in Detroit, or his secretary called me in Detroit. He said, Mr. Wolfram wants you to meet him at the Detroit airport, city airport, not the Metropolitan, and drive him to the GM building. Our offices are in the GM building. And that was a natural request for the zone office in Detroit to do. So I met the airplane. He said, Jarboe, don't visit with me. I have a lot of mail to read. Just get me to the GM building as quick as you can. Okay. And I kind of said, hello, how are you? How's the weather? How's the Mrs. Milton? What'd you think of the game? Peace. Quiet. Get me to the GM building. He's in the back seat and he's reading mail. I mean, he's going through it. Big ton of it. Well, we get down toward the General Motors building and I take a specific street. And he says, where are you going? I said, Mr. Wolfram, I have to take this street because they're working. The workmen have got 2nd Street tied up right now. They're digging up. He says, let me see if you're right. Well, would I lie to him? Possibly, his opinion. I went around someplace else, went up that way. All right, you're right. Then I had to back up and jockey around and come back around the way I was and go to the garage. Well, now that took 4 minutes, who knows what. But that's the way you go to the GM building. Here's a concern. I was going the wrong way, or I was lost, or I was doing something that would delay him from the meeting he had to go to. So he would check it out. But he would say to me, all right, at this table, I want these people to sit. And I want these people to sit over here, and I want these people to sit over here at the announcement show luncheons or something like this. Well, in some cases, but that wasn't That was helping Bob Jarboe. That was helping Oldsmobile, okay?
I guess we're all set.
So Oldsmobile's affiliation with the AT&T golf tournament, formerly the Bing Crosby golf tournament, continues today under sponsorship of the Oldsmobile Dealers Marketing Group in Northern California. And only recently, in August of this year, 1989, a fellow who used to be the transportation chairman is now the chairman of the entire activity. Spoke to me about some of their plans and activities going forward, and it's still, Oldsmobile is still in the public eye on the peninsula of Northern California.
You traveled with the new car announcement shows you mentioned.
Yeah.
What about Tom Hendy, working with him?
Okay. I have and I wish Tom were here. I don't think I've ever said this to Tom. I had a very strange relationship with Tom. I was his supervisor. And Helen, I didn't know 1/100th of 1% about Tom's work. To be a supervisor was a very strange thing. Tom taught me probably 60% of all I know in my entire business life as far as exhibit and display, proper care of, and advantages of lights, and auto show work. Tom was married to Oldsmobile. If I had to call Tom after hours or on a weekend, I called what he called the shop, exhibit and display, first. His present wife Janet's house second. His home third. And 75% of the time I get him at the shop. My perception was that I was Tom's supervisor because it involved things like budgets and schedules and administrative stuff. And, again, as I say, I wish Tom were here because this may not be his perception of his abilities, but I think his bosses, my bosses, perceived there was a time when they needed to have these kind of things done, and that wasn't Tom's strong talent. The love of Tom for all these people was unchecked. I remember his retirement party and the amount of things that came in from around the world from him was just, and the fact he didn't want to leave. And the fact is, yes, Tom, you've got to tell me who you want to be the next boss. And you're 65. You're not going to be the manager. Well, by God, they can't do this to me. And I said, well, I got to tell you, they're doing it. You want Jack Schaefer? Yes, I want Jack Schaefer. I said, well, then, take Jack out this year and train him. Well, somebody's got to run the shop back home. I said, then who's going to take Jack's job? Leave that, train these people. Don't always do this yourself. We know you can do it. We don't know that Jack can do it. Well, Jack knows everything I know. I say, Jack, oh no, I don't know any of those things. Tom could do it himself. He could fix anything. He could, design anything.
It's hard for him to delegate.
But it was hard for him not to do it himself. Okay. And so when I'd make up the annual budget, I'd sit down and he would tell me everything, and I'd write it down and put it in a presentation form and submit it into the general budget structure of the merchandising or marketing department or sales promotion department, wherever we were at the time, advertising department, and get it and sell it through. I'd do the mouth part, promotion part, the administration part. He would do the physical building, repairing, shipping, scrapping, change, and none of which I could even scratch my head at. He was a hands-on, old-school manager, and his contemporaries in every competitive car division in the United States, when they couldn't fix something out of show, they went first to Tom Hendy. Tom, I got this engine, it's acting up, what can I do? Now, he very often wouldn't even have to leave the Oldsmobile area to tell them what they had to go do. But in extreme sets of circumstances, he would wander over to their area and give them 15 minutes of appraisal of their problem and come back, and they would be solved. He just had the craftsman talent that really isn't apparent today in my mind, and people are now educated to do something. He was talented enough to be able to do it himself. and knew what the mechanical functions were without maybe knowing their college name or something like that. Okay. Yeah.
A lot of skills.
Oh, my God. Well, this is a very small one I'm going to tell you about. We were going to play in Southern California an announcement show, and we had to go to San Bernardino Convention Center. Sticks in my mind. But we'd never been there before. We'd always played elsewhere in the Los Angeles area. But facilities were not available on our tour dates, and after looking and looking and looking, we found this place. But now we're on an inspection tour. Bill Stratt's traffic would go along because we had the special train. Tom would go along because you have to find a place to unload and store and see what the union circumstances were. And I went along from a budgetary standpoint, and a housing standpoint, and the catering and the food, things like that. So Tom says to the fellow of the railroad people, well, we'll need a place to park this 12-car train during the 6 days we're here. Oh, that's right. I'll have to put you someplace so you're not in anybody else's way. Just a minute. Joe, give me the blueprints of section 9. So Joe comes in and unrolls a big thing, and we look at the thing over. He says, how about spur track 25? Well, that's not used at all anymore. That would be great. Will it handle 12 cars? Oh, yeah, easy. 15, no trouble at all. Okay, it's yours. What'll it cost? I said, nothing. We just don't use that place. Tom says, can we go see it? The guy says, hey, you don't want to go see it. It's kind of a grummy old place we had outside of town. I said, Tom, if we're going to make the airport, we're going to have to leave here in 20 minutes. We probably won't have time to go see. He said, you want to go to the next city? You go. I'm not leaving till I see where that train is going to be and how long that spur train. Well, he just said, when was that drawn? Well, 10, 11 years ago. He said, I want to see that track. I want to see where do I bring my trucks up to unload the train box cars off of that track. Do I have to carry those things across 12 rows of tracks before I can put them on a truck? Do I have to build some piece of wood that go between the rails? He's way ahead of me, okay? I said, no, I'm not going to go to the train without you. Let's go see the track. Got a guy, gets the map out. He says, I don't know where this place is, but we'll find it. We go searching up and down, up and down, up and down. We're there, we're an hour, I don't know, maybe 2 hours. But Helen, when we got there, up the street that we'd have to come, right across to where the train would be parked, was a palm tree growing out of the middle of the railroad tracks. That if we hadn't gone and seen that and had shown up that night, the train couldn't even gone down the track to where we could unload the trucks, bring the trucks to unload the train. Now, 4 months later, when we actually got there, that palm tree was long gone. But they hadn't used that spur. And this tree had grown right in the middle of the tracks. And Tom didn't know that. But Tom taught me, don't take anybody's word for anything. Go and look at it yourself. Because things change. And the guy said, what are you doing that for? You've been there before. I said, yeah, but it's a new catering manager, or they've just redecorated the room. Well, the room dimensions are all the same. I said, I don't know that. Oh, well, sure. Here's the blueprint. I said, well, is that the blueprint of the new? No, it's the same. And you got somebody to take a tape measure, go out this thing, and the room is now 4 feet less. 2 feet over here and 2 feet over there have been brought in for a new column or a new wall drop or a new design situation, and we can't put as many cars in as we thought we could. And that early experience came only, and it doesn't sound like the world is going to drop dead, but Helen and I have looked at probably 300 rooms for Oldsmobile to use since that day. And that early training from Tom is the only thing that ever saved me. That we went in there and we could function in there. Or one time I got into almost a legal fight at Hilton Hotels in New York City. The guy said to me, he says, I'm the only hotel in town that you can use. I have the only big ballroom, and it's only available these days. And I said, well, I'll take it, provided that my exhibit and display department says I can operate in here. That's my proviso. I'm not signing a firm deal with you, but only if I take your blueprint back and we can get our trucks in here, we get our cars in here, we can get 21 cars in this room, we can get enough catering stuff and a stage for entertainment. Okay, that's a part of the deal. Your proviso is providing your exhibits to the Department of Tourism. So I took the blueprints back. Tom drew them up. Jack or somebody else, drew them up for Tom. Tom looked at it and says, it won't work, Jarboe. This. Okay, thank you, Tom. I wrote back to the guy. I said, we cannot accept your offer based on the time frame you gave me, based on exhibit displays drawings, which I attached to show you, the reason A, B, C, and D. Oldsmobile cannot sign a contract with the Hilton Hotels to be our announcement show. Well, lo and behold, we got word of another hotel who lost a client, and we were able to move some things around. I think I was little cities or something, I went someplace first, and I went to Atlanta, then came back to New York, and went to Detroit or something. Mix mash, And all of a sudden, this guy at the Hilton Hotel sues me for breach of contract. Because he hears from somebody else that they got Oldsmobile account. And I got Oldsmobile. The letter I sent back to him was just put it in a file by some underling. He says he never saw it. I can't disagree with the man. But he never followed up. Where's your letter? 5 days have gone by. I never heard from you. And then I would say, well, there's another copy of my letter or something like that. But he didn't. 4 months went by. Now we're going to move into New York City, and he is suing, and he's got his lawyers out, and he demands full compensation for loss of business. Only because I had Tom Hendy's training was I able to avoid a major financial suit to Oldsmobile and a stigma with the Hilton Hotel, which I had to use many, many times across the United States. In fact, they brought in a Mr. Hilton. It wasn't the big Mr. Hilton, but a member of the family. At the end of about 4 or 5 hours, who said, we expect Oldsmobile. Here's a copy of your letter. They found it in our file, in the hotel's files, not with his initials on it. We're not going to sue you. And I don't think the sales manager was happy about this. He was going to, show Hilton how strong a man he was, by God. He says, we respect you. Have you made your plans for next year? Can we serve you another year if you have other, different rooms or different plans? And, yeah, sure, you can. But Tom just knew that you didn't trust anything on paper. You measures yourself. You turn on the sound system yourself. You found one time he says to a guy in the Americana Hotel, well, we're going to use this room. Everything's fine. Where's that telephone go to? The white telephone on the wall. I said, well, Tom, what are you worried about that for? We don't want the phone to ring. We'll just take it off the hook. Well, he says, where's it go? So the sales manager says, I'll find out. I don't know. Picks it up. There was no bio. It's just a phone. He gets a Puerto Rican from the kitchen. I can't say Puerto Rican. He says, oh my God, he says, we'll never fix this. They'll fix it, must be some communication between the Puerto Rican porters on this floor and the kitchen. He said, so the sales manager ripped the phone off the wall now in the Americana Hotel in New York City. He says, the time they get this thing fixed to the union and repairs is going to be 6 weeks. You'll be long out of here. You don't have to worry about the telephone.
For heaven's sakes.
I said, okay. You go, oh, here's the phone number. I'll just, somebody's just going to put it right back up there again, right? And ring, right in the middle of Mr. Wolfram's speech, ring. So those were small things, but they were amazing.
But sometimes those
Tom never allowed a rocket emblem on a wheel disc to do anything but point straight up. Now, give me a break. How many more cars is that going to sell? But how many pictures were taken of those things home? How many places do they appear in newspapers and in PR releases? You name it, dealer shops. And if the rocket was down or sideways or something else like that, I was going to lose 5 minutes of growth, but they were profit. They were right. And those guys didn't leave any place till those rockets were pointed straight, if there was a rocket on the windows.
His attention to detail was really something.
That was proper. That was finishing it all.
Now, Jack Schaefer replaced him.
He did. He did. And that was a tough thing to do. really a tough thing to do. First of all, Tom didn't leave immediately. Tom kept coming to work. Well, I got a lot of stuff lying around. He did, half this place, a third of the place was his. He couldn't get the budget to approve a new tool. He went out and bought it himself and brought it in, and he knew what his stuff was. It wasn't labeled with any Oldsmobile, part numbers or anything like this. But as I said, he was married to Oldsmobile in my mind. And I finally said, Jack, you're the manager of the display. You know where my old office is? He says, yeah. I said, what's in there? He says, well, we got some. I says, kick that junk out and you go sit in there. Mine was up front. And mine was around the corner when Building 7 was being built. I went over there for X number of months. Had an office built by them. They can build anything. So today, still the manager, Winter, works out of that office.
Oh,
Tom's original office never, still there when Tom comes in. No, it became the storage room. But I used to say, was Tom coming to sign the payroll yet, Yeah, he has. But now it's interesting because you go to the Chicago Auto Show, you go to the announcement show, and who's together? Tom and Jack. They come to check on Winter. He's doing it right.
isn't that helpful?
But they love it, it's in their blood. It's like me. What am I doing here talking to you for 3.5 hours? We all get the love. Well, but they're gracious too. I'm saying to you, Oldsmobile is more than a job. It's a life.
We interviewed, or Jim interviewed Tom,
Okay.
tried to get Janet down,
Uh-huh.
but haven't had any luck yet.
You ought to be sure to go over and get Helen Earley before she disappears.
Yes, of course, right now we're catching retired
Yeah.
people.
Okay.
And to be truthful, Bob, we're trying to catch people who are, not, in your case, you were right here, but I mean far away
Yeah.
that are older, because some people we've lost.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I've done a lot of things for Oldsmobile that are a far cry from what you might call mechanical engineering vehicle parts of the business. The motion, merchandising, marketing jobs call for a lot of, in my opinion, innovative, new, try something new, do something different. And I really am a proponent of that. You have me probably said it several times over my presentation. What is that going to be? How can you be different? And will it appeal to the public? I've had a chance on 2 or 3 occasions since retirement to talk to marketing classes at LCC. And the strain of my conversation is stand out from the crowd. I show them maybe 20 examples in the magazine or television or newspaper advertisements where your eyes are called immediately to that advertiser versus all the other ones on the page or in the newspaper, because they've advertised, but they've done it in a different way so that the reader, oh, what's this? Don't worry about everything else. It's black and white, black and white, black and white, black and white, little red in it. But here's one that jumps out. Around Halloween, there was a full-page ad from Merchants of Lansing, goodwill community gesture that gave 12 ways, 10 ways, how did I forget the number? 10 ways in which children could trick or treat safely. And they were printed in black down this column and a quarter, left-hand side of this full-page ad. The 32 merchants who contributed to the thing had their names in the middle of orange pumpkins. Pumpkin, 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 pumpkin. Every time I show that ad, say, who stands out from the crowd? The majority of the people, or the only name mentioned out of those 32 names, including Oldsmobile, is Myers Grocery. What did simply Myers do? Myers put a black patch almost as big as the pumpkin inside the pumpkin, and then had Myers pop out in white. Everybody else put black, this tight black across the orange pumpkin, their name or their company name. We had a rocket emblem, the new generation of Oldsmobile. The black patch catches your eye immediately out of these 32 pumpkins. And while I know Oldsmobile's in it, because I started analyzing that, see who other the 32 people were, I could probably give you 2 or 3 other names. I couldn't give you all 32 names, but I know that Myers did that. I can tell you that right now. And so the same cost as the other 31 people. And what they cost everybody to do a one-page ad has got to be minimal, really. They got my attention. They stood out from the crowd. Oldsmobile, and I tried to do that with a silly little acts and things like that, do a marketing group conference where I dressed and had a funny name. Tried to make them remember the show. Now, if you just look at the film and the antics, you say, well, what's that silly stuff going on for? But it was interspersed by 30 or 40-minute speeches enhancing what they could do to be different or unique or outshine their competition. And their interest was kept alive to watch all of this for 3 hours, 4 hours time, instead of getting me up there and talking to them for 4 hours, or 3 of us talking to them for an hour apiece or something like that. It gets heady and dull and everybody goes to the men's room or has a cigarette or the damn factory meetings that go on forever and ever. They always say the same thing. But they remembered, guys have written me over the years about this pitch or that pitch or this point or that point, how they've enhanced it or used it, and always remember it because it stuck out in their mind. Oldsmobile has to do that again because, we've been at it for the longest time. We don't want to go out of business. We don't want to lose this fine name. We got to find a way to have the consumer, again, respect Oldsmobile's quality, performance, design, dealer body, the whole shooting match.
Actually, Bob, you build up market analysis. You created.
Not market analysis.
Well, I don't mean, I mean marketing.
Marketing groups. They call me the father, and sometimes they call me the grandfather of it. But whatever, that's a lot of fun too. But it's not the only thing. It doesn't, all by itself would not do the job. You cannot have all this stuff and have a lousy product at a lousy price, at lousy places. You can't promote it. It's got to be a part of an overall picture, the mix. They call it the marketing mix. And you can't, you can fool so many people so long and you walk away from it. I don't know if you want this in or not, but, I'll put it on tape. But in my opinion, when they had the Chevrolet engine problem, you call that, Helen, that was the first year we ever sold 1 million cars. We had one of the most horrible marketing faults in our history that year, too, as far as the consumer and the press were concerned. That we were selling rocket engine cars with Chevrolet engines. But when the people had a chance to turn in those Chevrolet engines for something else, a large number of them, there were people madder than the devil at us. Don't decry that at all. But a large number of those people came back and said, well, I always wanted the blue Oldsmobile. So my wife didn't like the green, I came home with. Engine really was not the matter. Here they had a chance at no cost or at our cost to change their engine. But it was really something else in the car that they had a bad taste in their mouth for. So a lot of people, we sold 2 cars to that year. The first car, which they turned back in for a second car, not some other product. Secondly, just think about this. We were lambasted in the press, properly so, to some degree, depending on how your opinion is about things. But all during that same period of time, Helen, never ever once mentioned by anybody, what Cadillac division of General Motors was doing? Putting Oldsmobile rocket engines in their Cadillacs. Some of their Cadillacs. What's the difference? But no one jumped on it. Why did we give Cadillac, why did we put those instead of Chevrolets? Well, we're in the upper line of our products. I don't know, I wasn't in on that decision level, but it was just a strange thing that somebody in Wisconsin
We didn't
started this thing.
merchandise them as GM engines.
No, that's right. No, we were advertising the rocket engine, but we weren't saying in this car, or disclaiming some of the cars don't have rocket engines or something like this.
A simple.
And we had advertised that thing, and we were, it was so well known to our product name.
People assumed it too.
Yeah, well, what else would I get? That's all you make, isn't it? There's nothing in the catalog says, P.S. some of the engines will not be. I don't know if there was or not, but, maybe there was. But it was a bad blow between the eyes, but interesting enough, it was the first year we ever hit 1 million cars. And you got plaques out there on the wall commemorating it. Congratulatory letters and things like that. It overcame that problem. Our diesel engine.
I was gonna ask.
People will scream about that we were absolutely, the car, it was not worth the darn. Helen Lynn Myers surveys find a great quantity of people, not Oldsmobile employees who had to go through hours and hours and days and weeks of distraught customers with their diesel engines, was that Oldsmobile tried to give us an alternate engine during the time of the energy crisis. They truly are engineering leaders. They are a step out ahead. They gave us the first rocket engine, they gave us the first diesel. And it didn't work, but who else was out there trying to meet the national problem of an energy crisis? Get out of gasoline and get into diesel.
It's interesting.
It's interesting. Because you see, there is a perception about us. Oldsmobile means something to the public.
An innovator.
Now, whether General Motors let us try everything out to see if it was any good, I don't know what happened in those old days, But we got that as a part of our name, as a meaningful thing in the consumer's mind about Oldsmobile. Oh yeah, good engineering. Out first with new things, new products, engineering leader, proven quality. Then when they see things that aren't, it's not Oldsmobile anymore.
Takes a while.
Got to be better. I thought an Oldsmobile, I expected to be better. I wouldn't complain about this if I owned a Chevrolet or Ford. That's probably what I would get. But an Oldsmobile, you got to be better.
They expect.
Yeah. So you have to live up to that expectation.
We've got to try harder. But we are.
Yes.
I've learned a lot just listening to you.
Well, I hope so. I hope I have
Really
too.
have.
Well, bless your heart for talking to me and
You can read it. It's
sign. Close my eyes and sign my name is what you're saying.
Yeah, close your eyes and sign your name right there. Appreciate that.
You want to turn it off?
Sure, I appreciate your time too, because your experience here is going to be a welcome addition to our library.